The autumn rain fell steadily over Manhattan's Upper East Side, turning the sidewalks into mirrors that reflected the amber glow of street lamps. It was the kind of evening where the city seemed to hold its breath, where the usual chaos softened into something almost melancholic. Inside St. Augustine's Preparatory Academy, however, there was nothing soft about the silence that had fallen over the administrative wing. Principal Margaret Holloway sat behind her mahogany desk, her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. Across from her, a woman in an expensive navy suit checked her watch for the third time in as many minutes, while her husband, a man whose tailored black coat probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, stood by the window, his phone pressed to his ear, speaking in low, urgent tones. "Mrs. Holloway," the woman said, her voice sharp with barely contained frustration. "Our son has a bruise on his arm. A bruise. From another student. This is supposed to be one of the finest private schools in New York City." Margaret cleared her throat, choosing her words carefully. "Mrs. Wellington, I completely understand your concern. The incident this afternoon was unfortunate, but I must emphasize that the situation has been handled according to our protocols." "Protocols?" Mr. Wellington turned from the window, ending his call. "Your protocols don't seem to be working. That's the third incident this month involving the same child." Margaret felt her stomach tighten. She knew exactly which child they were referring to. Everyone at St. Augustine's knew. The Davis boy's father has been difficult to reach regarding these matters. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees at the mention of that name. The Wellingtons exchanged a glance that spoke volumes. Fear, calculation, resignation. "We're transferring Oliver to Dalton Academy," Mrs. Wellington said finally, standing up and smoothing her skirt. "Effective immediately. We'll send someone for his belongings tomorrow." Margaret wanted to argue, wanted to point out that Oliver Wellington had actually been the one who started the confrontation that afternoon by taking Matthew's book, but she knew it wouldn't matter. The Wellingtons were the third family to withdraw their child this semester, and it was only October. After they left, Margaret sat alone in her office, listening to the rain against the windows. She pulled out Matthew Davis's file, thin, despite him being enrolled since kindergarten. Excellent grades, exceptional test scores, particularly in mathematics and reading comprehension. But the behavioral notes painted a different picture. Does not interact with peers, refuses to participate in group activities, extremely withdrawn, and then, more recently, incident in cafeteria, altercation during recess, destroyed classroom materials. What troubled Margaret most wasn't the behavior itself. She'd been an educator for 32 years and had seen plenty of troubled children. What troubled her was the look in Matthew Davis's eyes. At 6 years old, he had the gaze of someone much older, someone who had seen things no child should see. There was an emptiness there that was almost haunting. She picked up her phone to call Victor Davis once more, knowing it would go to voicemail like all the others. The voice that answered was automated, professional, revealing nothing. Margaret left another message, her 7th this month, then gathered her things and headed out into the rain. Several blocks away in the restaurant district near Central Park, Romano's was beginning its Friday evening service. The Italian restaurant had been a neighborhood fixture for 43 years, known for its authentic cuisine, warm atmosphere, and loyal clientele. The dining room glowed with soft candlelight, and the scent of garlic, basil, and fresh-baked bread filled the air. Hannah Moore pushed through the kitchen doors, balancing 3 plates with practiced ease. At 24, she'd been waitressing for 6 years, ever since her sophomore year of college when her father passed away, and she'd needed to help with bills. She'd planned to finish her education degree, but then her mother got sick, and plans had a way of changing when medical bills started arriving. "Table 7 needs water," called Marco, the head waiter, as Hannah delivered her plates to a family celebrating someone's birthday. "On it," Hannah replied, grabbing a pitcher and making her way through the dining room. She moved with efficiency born of experience, her dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, her smile genuine despite the exhaustion she felt in her bones. This was her second job of the day. She'd already done a morning shift at a coffee shop, and she had an overnight stocking shift at a grocery store starting at 11. "Hannah, sweetie, Mrs. Romano called from behind the bar where she was polishing wine glasses. The restaurant owner was a round woman in her 70s with kind eyes and an accent that had never quite left despite decades in New York. "You look tired. When did you last have a day off?" "I'm fine, Mrs. Romano," Hannah assured her. refilling water glasses at table 7. Really? That's what you always say. Mrs. Romano shook her head, but said nothing more. She'd known Hannah since she was a teenager, knew about her mother's declining health, knew that Hannah worked herself to exhaustion, trying to keep up with the medical expenses. She'd given Hannah as many shifts as she could, even when business was slow. The evening progressed in its usual rhythm. Families sharing meals, couples on dates, business dinners winding down. Romano's had a comfortable, old-world elegance that made people linger over their wine and conversation. Hannah navigated it all with practiced grace, her mind partly on the table she was serving, and partly calculating whether she'd have enough for her mother's medications this month after the rent was paid. She was heading back to the kitchen when Marco caught her arm. "Hannah, table 12 just got seated. Antonio's section, but—" He lowered his voice. "It's the Davis party." He asked if you could take it. Hannah glanced toward table 12, one of the larger booths in the corner. She could see several men in expensive suits, the kind of men who carried themselves with a particular type of authority that made everyone around them slightly nervous. In the center of the booth sat a small boy with dark hair, dressed in a tiny designer suit that probably cost more than Hannah made in a month. "Why me?" she asked, though she was already untying her apron strings to retie them, straightening her posture. Marco shifted uncomfortably. "They've been here twice before. Both times there were problems. Antonio's nervous, Giuseppe's nervous, everyone's nervous, but you," he shrugged. "You have a way with difficult customers." Hannah wanted to laugh at that. She didn't have a way with anyone. She simply treated everyone with basic respect and kindness, which apparently was remarkable enough to be notable. "Okay, I'll take it." As she approached table 12, she could feel the subtle shift in the dining room's atmosphere. Other servers were steering clear of that corner. Conversations at nearby tables had dropped to hushed whispers, and even Mrs. Romano had emerged from behind the bar to watch with concern. The men at the table were discussing something in low voices when Hannah arrived, but they fell silent as she approached. The one at the head of the table, clearly the one in charge, had sharp features and eyes that seemed to calculate everything. His dark suit was immaculate, and there was something in his bearing that spoke of power and danger in equal measure. "Good evening," Hannah said with her professional smile, pulling out her notepad. "Welcome to Romano's. My name is Hannah, and I'll be taking care of you this evening. Can I start you off with something to drink?" The man, Victor Davis, though Hannah didn't know his name yet, studied her for a long moment. It was the kind of look that probably made most people uncomfortable, but Hannah had dealt with plenty of difficult customers. She met his gaze steadily, waiting. "Water for the table," he said finally. "Bring us your wine list. And a lemonade for my son." Hannah's eyes shifted to the boy for the first time. Matthew Davis sat perfectly still, his small hands folded on the table in front of him. He couldn't have been more than 6 or 7, but there was something unsettling about his composure. Most children his age would be squirming, looking around, playing with their napkin or silverware. Matthew simply sat there, his dark eyes fixed on some point in the middle distance. "Of course," Hannah said. "I'll be right back with those drinks." As she walked away, she could feel those calculating eyes on her back. Not just Victor's, but the boy's as well. There was something about the child that tugged at something in Hannah's chest, some instinct she couldn't quite name. In the kitchen, she found Marco hovering near the door. "How did it go?" "Fine so far," Hannah said, preparing the drinks. "They're just people, Marco." "Just people," he repeated, shaking his head. "Hannah, you need to be careful. Those aren't just people. That's Victor Davis." The name clearly meant something to everyone else in the kitchen. Giuseppe, the head chef, crossed himself. Antonio looked relieved he wasn't serving that table. Even Mrs. Romano, who had followed Hannah into the kitchen, wore an expression of deep concern. "Who is Victor Davis?" Hannah asked, arranging glasses on a tray. Mrs. Romano started to answer, then seemed to think better of it. "Just be careful, dear. Be professional. Don't say anything you don't need to say." Hannah found the warning strange, but she'd learned long ago that the Upper East Side had its own rules and hierarchies that she, as someone from Queens who took 3 buses to get to work, couldn't fully understand. She loaded her tray and headed back out. The evening continued without incident at first. Hannah took their orders. Victor and his associates ordered expensive steaks and wine, while Matthew was given a simple pasta dish that he didn't touch. She checked on them periodically, refilled drinks, ensured everything was satisfactory. The men talked business in voices too low for her to hear specifics, and Matthew sat motionless, staring at his untouched plate. It was during her 4th check-in, As she was clearing their appetizer plates that things began to shift. "Matthew," Victor said, his tone carrying an edge that made Hannah's shoulders tense involuntarily. "Eat your dinner." The boy didn't move. "I'm speaking to you." Victor's voice was quieter now, which somehow made it more intense. "Pick up your fork and eat." Hannah busied herself with collecting plates, trying to be invisible, but she couldn't help watching from the corner of her eye. Matthew's hands remained folded, his face expressionless. One of the other men at the table shifted uncomfortably. "Victor, maybe the kid's just not hungry. He'll eat what he's served." Victor's jaw tightened. "Matthew. Last time." Something flickered across the boy's face then. Not fear exactly, but something harder, more defiant. His small hands curled into fists. Hannah moved away quickly, her server instincts telling her to give the situation space. She delivered check to another table, refilled bread baskets, all while keeping table 12 in her peripheral vision. The tension there was palpable now, spreading like a wave through the nearby tables. Other diners were glancing over, sensing something brewing. Then it happened. Matthew stood up suddenly, his small body rigid. Before anyone could react, his hand shot out and swept across the table, sending his untouched plate sliding across the surface. The pasta scattered, sauce splattering across the white tablecloth. The water glasses tipped, one of them rolling off the edge to shatter on the floor. The entire restaurant seemed to freeze. "Matthew!" Victor's voice cracked like a whip, but the boy wasn't finished. He grabbed his fork and hurled it across the booth, then his glass, then his napkin, his silverware, anything within reach. His face had transformed from that eerie calm into something raw and anguished. His mouth twisted, his eyes blazing with an emotion that seemed far too big for such a small body. The men at the table half stood, trying to contain the situation, but Matthew was like a force of nature. He climbed onto the booth seat and began pulling at the curtain that partially enclosed their table. The fabric tore with a terrible ripping sound. Other diners were standing now, moving away, ushering their children back. Hannah saw Mrs. Romano hurrying toward the table, her face pale. Marco was on the phone, probably calling. Who? The police? What did you do in a situation like this? But what struck Hannah most, what made her heart ache in a way she wasn't prepared for, was the sound the boy made. It wasn't just anger. It was pain. Deep, terrible pain, wrapped in fury. The kind of sound that came from somewhere broken inside. "Everyone back," Victor commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. The men at his table immediately complied, stepping away. Victor himself remained seated, his face a mask of cold control even as his son destroyed everything within reach. He didn't try to stop him, didn't try to calm him. He simply watched with those calculating eyes, as if waiting for the storm to burn itself out. Matthew jumped down from the booth and began sweeping plates off nearby tables. Customers scrambled back. More glasses shattered. Food spilled across the floor. He moved with shocking strength for someone so small, driven by something that seemed to possess him completely. Mrs. Romano reached the scene. "Please, we need to—" "Don't touch him," Victor said quietly, but with absolute authority. "No one touches him." And no one did. The staff, the other customers, everyone simply retreated, leaving Matthew in the center of a widening circle of destruction. He grabbed a decorative vase from a side table and raised it over his head. That's when Hannah moved. She didn't think about it, didn't calculate the risks or consider the warnings everyone had given her. She simply saw a child in distress, a child who needed someone to care more about him than about the mess he was making or the rules he was breaking. "Matthew," she said, her voice calm and gentle as she walked toward him. "Matthew, honey, can you look at me?" The boy froze, the vase still raised. His chest was heaving, his face flushed, tears streaming down his cheeks that he seemed unaware of. "Don't—" Someone started to warn her, but Hannah kept walking. "I know you're upset," she continued, slowly closing the distance between them. "And that's okay. It's okay to be upset. But I think you're tired too. I think you're very, very tired." Matthew's arms were trembling now, the vase shaking in his grip. His eyes, those dark, wounded eyes, locked onto Hannah's face. "I have something I think might help," Hannah said, stopping a few feet away from him. "There's the most delicious chocolate cake in the kitchen. Giuseppe makes it fresh every day, and I snuck a slice because I thought maybe after dinner you might like to try it. Would you like that? Would you like to try some cake?" The dining room was absolutely silent. Everyone watched as the 6-year-old boy slowly, incrementally, lowered his arms. The vase came down to his chest. then to his waist. Then he simply let it drop to the floor where it rolled across the carpet without breaking. "Can I show you the cake?" Hannah asked gently. "You don't have to eat it if you don't want to, but I thought maybe you'd like to see it first." Matthew didn't speak. Hannah was beginning to suspect he rarely did, but he gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "Okay," Hannah said, extending her hand. "Come with me." For a long moment, nothing happened. The entire restaurant held its breath. Then slowly Matthew walked forward and placed his small hand in Hannah's. She led him through the dining room, past the scattered debris and shattered glasses, past the stunned customers and nervous staff, straight to the kitchen. Matthew followed without resistance, his hand surprisingly cold in hers. In the kitchen, Giuseppe stood frozen with a ladle in his hand, his eyes wide. Hannah caught his attention and mouthed the word, "cake." The chef blinked, then seemed to understand. He moved quickly to the dessert station and prepared a perfect slice of his signature chocolate cake. 4 layers of dark chocolate with raspberry cream, topped with fresh berries. Hannah guided Matthew to a small stool near the prep station, away from the chaos of the main kitchen. She pulled up another stool and sat beside him, accepting the plate from Giuseppe with a grateful nod. "There," she said, setting the plate between them. "Doesn't that look good?" Matthew stared at the cake. Up close, Hannah could see that he was shaking slightly, the adrenaline leaving his system. His face was blotchy from crying, his expensive little suit askew, his hair disheveled. He looked for the first time like exactly what he was, a 6-year-old child. "You don't have to eat it right now," Hannah said softly, "but it's here if you want it. Sometimes when I'm having a really hard day, something sweet helps. Not because it fixes anything, but because everyone deserves something sweet sometimes, especially on hard days." Matthew reached out slowly, his small fingers wrapping around the fork. He lifted a tiny bite of cake to his mouth, chewed, swallowed, then took another bite, and another. Hannah sat with him in comfortable silence, not pushing, not asking questions, just being present. In the background, she could hear the dining room being cleaned up, hushed conversations, the sound of Marco apologizing to customers. But here, in this small corner of the kitchen, there was just a little boy eating cake and a waitress who had decided that kindness mattered more than protocol. When Matthew had eaten about half the slice, he set down his fork and turned to look at Hannah directly for the first time. His eyes were red-rimmed but clear, and in them she saw something that broke her heart, a desperate, aching loneliness. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice hoarse and small. "You're welcome," Hannah replied, feeling tears prick at her own eyes. "Anytime you need cake, you just let me know, okay?" The kitchen doors swung open, and Victor Davis strode in with the commanding presence of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. His face was impossible to read, but Hannah felt her heart rate spike. She'd just taken his son in the middle of some kind of episode, led him away without permission, and now Victor stopped a few feet away, his gaze moving from Matthew's tear-stained face to the half-eaten cake to Hannah's protective posture beside his son. "Matthew," he said, his voice neutral. "Come." Matthew slid off his stool immediately, that eerie composure sliding back over his features like a mask. But before he walked away, he looked back at Hannah one more time, and she saw the smallest hint of something in his expression. Maybe gratitude, maybe hope, maybe just recognition that for 5 minutes, someone had seen him as a person rather than a problem. Victor paused as he reached the door, turning back. "What's your name?" "Hannah Moore, sir." He studied her for another long moment. "Thank you for the cake, Miss Moore." Then they were gone, leaving Hannah sitting alone on the stool, her hands trembling slightly as the adrenaline finally caught up with her. Giuseppe approached cautiously. "Madonna, Hannah, are you okay?" "I don't know," she admitted honestly. "Who is that family?" The chef and Mrs. Romano, who had followed Victor into the kitchen, exchanged another one of those meaningful looks. Finally, Mrs. Romano sighed. "The Davis family is complicated, powerful, dangerous, some say. Victor Davis runs several businesses in the city, legitimate ones mostly, but there are rumors about his other dealings. He's not someone you want to cross." She reached out and squeezed Hannah's shoulder. "But what you did tonight, that was very brave, or very foolish. I'm not sure which. That little boy is hurting," Hannah said quietly, still staring at the kitchen doors. "I don't care who his father is, or what he does. No 6-year-old should look that lost." "No, Mrs. Romano agreed softly. "No child should." The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Romano's offered free desserts to the customers who'd witnessed the incident, And surprisingly, no one seemed angry, more shaken than anything else. The staff helped clean up the damage, which was extensive but not as bad as it had seemed in the moment. A few broken glasses, some spilled food, a torn curtain that could be repaired. Marco pulled Hannah aside before she left for her next shift. Victor Davis left this. He handed her an envelope. Inside was a tip, $500 in cash. Hannah stared at the money, her mind reeling. It was more than she made in a week, would cover her mother's medications for the month, would give her a buffer she desperately needed. But it also felt wrong somehow, like payment for something that shouldn't be transactional. Take it, Mrs. Romano urged, reading her expression. You earned it tonight, Hannah. Whatever else that family might be, they clearly appreciated what you did. Hannah folded the envelope and tucked it into her apron pocket. She thought about Matthew's face, about the desperate loneliness in his eyes, about the way his hand had felt so cold and small in hers. $500 seemed both too much and not nearly enough compensation for what she'd witnessed. A child so lost, so hurt, that destruction was the only language he had left to express his pain. As she rode the bus to her overnight shift, rain still streaking down the windows, Hannah found herself thinking about those dark eyes and wondering if she'd ever see them again. Part of her hoped not. The encounter had left her shaken, made her feel like she'd glimpsed something dark and complex that she wasn't equipped to handle. But another part of her, the part that had chosen education as her major because she wanted to help children, the part that still believed kindness mattered even when the world seemed determined to prove otherwise, that part hoped Matthew Davis would come back. Because if ever a child needed someone to offer him cake, to offer him simple, uncomplicated kindness with no agenda attached, it was him. The bus pulled to her stop and Hannah stepped out into the rain, pulling her thin jacket tighter against the cold. Tomorrow she'd call her mother, make sure she'd taken her medications, check if the nurse had visited. Tomorrow she'd work her coffee shop shift and come back to Romano's and do it all over again. But tonight, just for tonight, she'd given a broken little boy a slice of cake and maybe, just maybe, a moment where he felt seen. And sometimes, Hannah thought as she hurried through the rain toward the grocery store's back entrance, sometimes that had to be enough. The following Tuesday morning arrived cold and gray, typical for late November in New York. Hannah stood at the counter of Morning Brew coffee shop in Midtown, her first shift of the day, mechanically preparing lattes and cappuccinos while her mind remained elsewhere. She'd worked the overnight stocking shift at the grocery store, grabbed 3 hours of sleep on her friend's couch, closer than going home to Queens, and now faced another 12-hour day. "Earth to Hannah," called Derek, her co-worker, waving a hand in front of her face. "You just put salt instead of sugar in that cappuccino." "What?" Hannah blinked, looking down at the cup. "Oh no. I'm so sorry. I'll remake it." Derek gently took the cup from her hands. "I've got it. You look exhausted. When did you last sleep more than 4 hours?" "I sleep plenty," Hannah lied, already reaching for the next order ticket. But her hands were trembling slightly, and she knew Derek noticed. "Hannah," his voice was softer now, concerned. "You're running yourself into the ground. This can't be sustainable." Before she could respond, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out to see a text from her mother's nurse. Rose had a difficult morning, breathing troubles. "She's stable now, but asking for you." Hannah's chest tightened. "Derek, I need to make a call. Can you cover for 5 minutes?" "Of course, go." She stepped into the back room, her hands shaking as she dialed. The nurse, Patricia, answered on the second ring. "Hannah, honey, don't panic. She's okay now. We had to use the oxygen a bit more than usual, but she's resting comfortably." "I should come home," Hannah said immediately, already mentally calculating if she could afford to miss her shifts. "No, sweetie. You know what your mother would say. She made me promise to tell you to stay at work. She's sleeping now anyway." Hannah leaned against the wall, fighting back tears. Her mother, Rose Moore, had been diagnosed with progressive pulmonary fibrosis 3 years ago. The disease was slowly stealing her ability to breathe, and while there were treatments that could slow its progression, they were expensive. The insurance covered some, but the copays, the medications, the special equipment, it all added up to an impossible amount. "Patricia, are we okay with this month's nursing fees?" There was a pause. "Hannah, you're 2 weeks behind. I don't want to pressure you, but the agency is asking questions." I know. I get paid Friday and I had a good tip last week. I'll bring a payment this weekend, I promise." After hanging up, Hannah allowed herself exactly 30 seconds to feel the crushing weight of it all. The exhaustion, the fear, the impossible mathematics of trying to keep her mother alive on 3 minimum wage jobs. Then she wiped her eyes, straightened her shoulders, and went back to work. She had 4 more hours at the coffee shop, then a short break before her evening shift at Romano's. She couldn't afford to fall apart. Her mother was counting on her. Romano's was busy when Hannah arrived that evening, grateful to be back in a space that felt almost like home. Mrs. Romano greeted her with a warm hug and a concerned look that Hannah had become accustomed to. "You look tired, dear." "I'm fine," Hannah said automatically, tying her apron. "Where do you need me tonight?" "Your usual section, but Hannah," Mrs. Romano hesitated. "The Davis party called. They're coming in tonight. They asked specifically for you." Hannah's hands stilled on her apron strings. She hadn't seen Matthew or his father since that chaotic evening 5 days ago. She'd thought about them, wondered how the little boy was doing, but she'd assumed, hoped perhaps, that she'd never see them again. The memory of that night still unsettled her, the way everyone had reacted with such fear, the warnings from Marco and Mrs. Romano. Did they say anything else? Just that they wanted you as their server. "Hannah, you don't have to take the table. I can have Giuseppe." "No," Hannah interrupted, surprising herself. "No, I'll take it. It's fine." And it was fine, she told herself. They were just customers, a father and his son. She'd treated them with kindness, and apparently they'd appreciated it. That was all. The Davis party arrived at 7:30, and Hannah felt her breath catch when she saw them. Victor Davis looked exactly as he had before, impeccably dressed, radiating authority, flanked by 2 associates. But it was Matthew who drew her attention. The little boy walked slightly behind his father, his small hand gripping the edge of Victor's coat. He was dressed in another expensive outfit, dark slacks and a navy sweater that probably cost more than Hannah's weekly grocery budget. But what struck her was his face. When his eyes found hers across the dining room, something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but a softening, a recognition. "Good evening," Hannah greeted them as they settled into the same corner booth. "Welcome back to Romano's." Victor nodded in acknowledgement. "Miss Moore, my son was hoping you'd be working tonight." Hannah glanced at Matthew, who was now staring at his place setting with fierce concentration. "Well, I'm glad I could be here. Can I start you gentlemen with drinks?" The ordering process went smoothly. Victor and his associates requested wine and their usual appetizers, while Matthew was given water, and after a long pause, quietly asked for lemonade. Hannah noticed he'd made the request himself this time, his voice barely above a whisper, but it was there, a small step from the complete silence of their last visit. "I'll be right back with those," Hannah said, then added gently, "Matthew, we have chocolate cake again tonight. Giuseppe made a fresh one this afternoon. I'll make sure to save you a slice." The boy's eyes snapped up to meet hers, and this time there was definitely something like hope in them. He gave a tiny nod before returning his attention to the table. As Hannah walked away, she felt Victor Davis watching her with those calculating eyes, but she refused to let it intimidate her. Whatever else he might be, he was a father who'd brought his son back to a place where something positive had happened. That had to mean something. The evening progressed differently than their first visit. Matthew sat quietly as before, but this time he ate his dinner. Not all of it, but several bites without prompting. He didn't engage with his father's conversation, but he also didn't seem as rigidly tense. Every time Hannah checked on the table, she felt his eyes follow her, watching with an intensity that was both touching and slightly unnerving. During one of her stops to refill water, one of Victor's associates, a younger man with nervous energy, spoke up. "The kid never eats this much. What did you do to him?" Hannah felt her cheeks warm. "I didn't do anything special. Sometimes children just need patience." "Patience," Victor repeated, his tone unreadable. "Is that what you call it?" "Yes, sir. Children aren't that different from adults. They want to be treated with respect, to feel safe, to know someone sees them as a person." Hannah realized she might be overstepping, but continued anyway. "Matthew just needs someone to be patient with him." The table fell silent. Victor's associates exchanged glances, and Hannah wondered if she'd gone too far, if she'd be asked to leave, or if they'd complain to Mrs. Romano. But Victor simply studied her for a long moment, then turned to his son. "Matthew, do you like Miss Moore?" The boy's head bobbed in an unmistakable yes. "She's kind to you?" Another nod, more emphatic this time. Victor returned his attention to Hannah, something shifting in his expression that might have been approval. "Bring us the dessert menu when you have a moment." For the next 3 weeks, the pattern repeated. The Davis party came to Romano's every Tuesday and Friday evening, always requesting Hannah's section. Each visit, Matthew seemed slightly more present, slightly less like a small ghost haunting the edges of his father's world. During the third visit, Matthew drew a picture on his napkin while waiting for dinner, a simple sketch of what appeared to be a dog. When Hannah commented on it, he actually spoke more than a whisper. "I want a dog. Father says maybe." "Dogs are wonderful," Hannah said, crouching slightly to be at his eye level. "What kind would you want?" "A big one. To protect—" He trailed off, his expression clouding. "To protect you?" Hannah supplied gently. Matthew nodded, then quickly looked at his father as if he'd said too much. But Victor was deep in conversation and hadn't heard. By the fourth visit, Hannah had learned small pieces of Matthew's life through their brief interactions. He attended St. Augustine's Preparatory Academy. He didn't like group activities. He was very good at math. His favorite color was blue. His mother had left when he was 3. This information came accidentally when Matthew mentioned, "before she went away." "Do you miss her?" Hannah had asked gently. Matthew's response was to go completely silent for the rest of the evening, and Hannah realized she'd touched on something too painful. She made a mental note to avoid the topic. It was during their 5th visit in early December that everything began to shift in ways Hannah hadn't anticipated. She was refilling coffee for Victor's associates when she overheard part of their conversation, something about a situation at the warehouse and handling it discreetly. The tone made her uncomfortable, reminding her of all the warnings she'd received about this family. Later, as she cleared their appetizer plates, one of the men received a phone call that clearly brought bad news. His face paled, and he whispered something to Victor that made the atmosphere at the table change instantly. Victor's jaw tightened, his eyes went cold, and suddenly the urbane businessman disappeared, replaced by something harder. "Matthew," Victor said, his voice clipped, "stay here with Miss Moore. We need to step outside for a moment." Before Hannah could respond, Victor and his 3 associates had left the booth heading toward Romano's entrance. Matthew sat alone in the large booth, his small frame seeming even tinier in the sudden absence of adults. Hannah glanced around. The restaurant was busy, but Marco caught her eye and nodded. He'd watch her other tables. She slid into the booth across from Matthew. "They'll be back soon," she assured him, though she had no idea if that was true. Matthew stared at his hands folded on the table. "Something bad happened. You don't know that?" "Something bad always happens." His voice was flat, matter-of-fact, and far too weary for a 6-year-old. "That's why we have to leave places. That's why people are scared." Hannah's heart broke a little more. "Matthew, honey, look at me." He raised his eyes, and in them she saw the truth of his existence. A child who'd learned too young that the world was dangerous, that his father's business involved things that made people afraid, that normal wasn't something he'd ever be allowed to have. "Not everyone is scared," Hannah said softly. "I'm not scared of you. I think you're a smart, kind boy who's dealing with very difficult things, and that's not your fault. People leave." Matthew's voice was so quiet she almost missed it. "Everyone leaves. Your mom," Hannah said gently, understanding now. "She left because I was bad. Because I couldn't." He struggled for words. "Because I'm wrong. Something's wrong with me." "No." Hannah reached across the table, stopping just short of taking his hand, letting him decide. "Matthew, listen to me. You are not wrong. You are not bad. Your mother leaving, that was about her, not you. Sometimes adults make choices that hurt children, but it's never the child's fault. Never." Matthew stared at her hand, then slowly, carefully placed his own small hand in hers. His palm was cold, his fingers thin and delicate. They sat like that for several moments, the noise of the restaurant fading around them. "My mom is sick," Hannah found herself saying. "Really sick. And sometimes I'm scared she'll leave too, even though I know it's not because of anything I did. But it's still scary, isn't it? Loving people and being afraid they'll go away?" Matthew nodded, his eyes glistening. "But here's what I know," Hannah continued. "The fear doesn't mean we stop loving them. It doesn't mean we stop being kind or stop hoping. And it definitely doesn't mean there's something wrong with us. Miss Moore?" Matthew's voice was tiny. "Will you leave?" The question landed in Hannah's chest like a weight. She couldn't promise she wouldn't. She was a waitress he saw twice a week. She had no real place in his life, no claim, no authority. She could quit tomorrow. The restaurant could close. His father could decide to eat somewhere else. There were 1,000 ways she could disappear from Matthew's life. But looking at his face, at the desperate hope warring with learned disappointment, Hannah couldn't bring herself to be practical. "I'll be here every Tuesday and Friday evening," she said. As long as you keep coming to Romano's, I'll be here, that's a promise. Really, really, you can count on it. Matthew's grip on her hand tightened slightly. Thank you. Victor Davis returned 15 minutes later, his expression controlled, but Hannah could see tension in his shoulders, something unresolved in his eyes. His associates looked shaken. Whatever they'd discussed outside had clearly been serious. Miss Moore, Victor said, sliding back into the booth. Thank you for staying with my son. Of course, Hannah replied, standing to give them space. Can I get you anything else? Actually, yes. Victor pulled out his wallet, extracting a business card. My son seems to respond well to you. I'd like to discuss a potential arrangement. Hannah took the card cautiously. It was elegantly simple. Victor Davis, followed by a phone number. No company name, no title, just his name and a way to reach him. What kind of arrangement? Not here. Call that number tomorrow afternoon. We'll talk then. Hannah wanted to ask more, wanted to understand what he meant, but something in Victor's expression told her this wasn't the time. She pocketed the card with a nod. As they left that evening, Matthew turned back one more time, giving Hannah a small wave. She waved back, watching them disappear into the cold December night, and felt the weight of that business card in her pocket like a question she wasn't sure she wanted answered. The next day, Hannah sat in her mother's small room in their Queens apartment watching Rose sleep. The oxygen machine hummed steadily, and Patricia had left detailed notes about the morning's difficulties. Hannah had come home between shifts, needing to see for herself that her mother was okay. Rose stirred, her eyes opening slowly. Hannah? Sweetheart, you should be at work. I wanted to check on you. Hannah took her mother's hand. So thin now, the bones prominent. Patricia said you had trouble breathing this morning. I'm fine now, don't fuss. But Rose's voice was weak. Her breathing labored even with the oxygen. Tell me about your week. You look tired. I'm always tired, Mom. That's not an answer. Rose squeezed her hand with what little strength she had. Talk to me. Let me be your mother even if I can't do much else. So Hannah told her about Matthew, about the first chaotic encounter, about how he'd been coming back, about the strange connection forming between them, about the business card burning a hole in her pocket. She left out the warnings, the implications about Victor Davis's business, the fear in other people's eyes. But Rose had always been perceptive. This family, Rose said carefully, they sound complicated. They are. And this little boy, you care about him. It wasn't a question, but Hannah answered anyway. I do, Mom, he's so lost. He needs someone who sees him as more than a problem or an obligation. He needs someone like you, Rose finished. Oh, Hannah, your heart is so big. It's one of the things I love most about you, but sweetheart, be careful. You can't save everyone. I'm not trying to save anyone. I'm just being kind. Rose's eyes held understanding and concern in equal measure. Kindness has consequences too, sometimes the biggest ones. Later, as Hannah rode the subway back toward Manhattan for her evening shift at Romano's, she pulled out Victor Davis's card. She'd been carrying it for 24 hours, unsure what to do. Call him? Ignore it? Throw it away? Her phone buzzed. A text from Patricia. Hannah, the pharmacy called. They can't fill next month's prescriptions without payment. $847.63. Hannah stared at the number, feeling the familiar panic rising. She had maybe $200 after this week's bills. Even with her 3 jobs, she was barely treading water. Her mother needed those medications. Without them, the disease would progress faster. She looked down at the business card again, at the phone number that might offer some kind of solution. Victor Davis had money. That much was obvious from his clothes, his associates, the casual way he tipped $500. If he wanted to hire her for something, it might pay enough to actually help. But at what cost? Hannah thought about Matthew's face, about his small hand in hers, about the promise she'd made. I'll be here. You can count on it. Maybe it didn't matter what Victor wanted to discuss. Maybe all that mattered was that there was a 6-year-old boy who needed someone to show up, consistently, and without conditions. And maybe, just maybe, that alignment of need, his son's and hers, could work out to everyone's benefit. With trembling fingers, Hannah dialed the number. Victor Davis answered on the second ring. Miss Moore, I was hoping you'd call. You said you wanted to discuss an arrangement. I did. My son responds to you in ways he doesn't respond to anyone else. His teacher called yesterday. Apparently Matthew participated in class for the first time this year. He mentioned you by name. Hannah's heart swelled. He did? Which brings me to my proposition. I'd like to hire you as Matthew's companion. Not a nanny, not a tutor. Simply someone who spends time with him after school and on weekends. Someone who treats him the way you've been treating him. I don't understand. You want to pay me to be nice to your son? I want to pay you to be consistent in his life, to be someone he can count on. You said he needs patience. I'm offering you compensation to provide that patience. Hannah's mind raced. I have 3 jobs, Mr. Davis. I can't just... I'll match what you're currently making. All 3 jobs combined. You'll work for me exclusively. The number he named made Hannah's knees weak. It was more than she'd made in the best month of her life, and he was offering it as a standard rate. With that kind of money, she could afford her mother's medications, could pay Patricia on time, could maybe even start saving for the treatments insurance didn't cover. This feels like too much for just spending time with a child, Hannah said carefully. My son's well-being is worth any price, Miss Moore. The question is whether you're willing to accept. Hannah thought about her mother's labored breathing, about the pharmacy bills and the nursing fees and the crushing weight of impossible mathematics. She thought about Matthew's small hand in hers, his quiet voice asking if she'd leave. I need to think about it, she finally said. Of course, but Hannah. Victor's use of her first name felt deliberate, intimate in a way that set off warning bells. Whatever you decide, my son will be disappointed if you stop showing up on Fridays and Tuesdays. Don't make promises to children you can't keep. The line went dead. Hannah stood on the subway platform, commuters rushing past her, and realized she was crying, not from sadness but from the overwhelming complexity of choice. Every option felt like both a salvation and a betrayal, of her mother, of herself, of the small boy who'd asked if she would leave. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from Patricia. Rose asking for you. Says she needs to tell you something important. Hannah wiped her eyes and headed toward home instead of the restaurant. She'd call Mrs. Romano, explain she needed the night off. Some decisions couldn't wait, and some conversations with your mother were more important than any job, any promise, any amount of money could account for. As the train pulled away from the station, Hannah looked at her reflection in the darkened window and barely recognized herself. Exhausted, scared, but also something else. Hopeful, maybe. Or maybe just desperate enough to believe that kindness could be enough, that showing up could matter, that sometimes the universe aligned in ways that helped everyone. She closed her eyes and let the motion of the train carry her home, toward her mother and the conversation that would help her decide what to do about Victor Davis, his broken son, and the impossible choice between safety and showing up for someone who needed her. Whatever happened next, Hannah thought, at least Matthew would know that for these few weeks, someone had seen him, someone had stayed, and maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to make whatever came next worth the risk. Hannah sat across from her mother in the small living room of their Queens apartment, the winter afternoon light filtering through thin curtains. Rose was propped up on the worn sofa, oxygen tubes in her nose, a blanket across her lap despite the heater running. She looked smaller somehow, more fragile than she had even a week ago. Tell me again what this man is offering, Rose said, her voice steady despite the effort it took to speak. Hannah repeated Victor Davis's proposition, watching her mother's face for any sign of judgment. But Rose simply listened, her intelligent eyes never leaving Hannah's face. It's a lot of money, Mom. Enough to cover everything. Your medications, Patricia's fees, the equipment. Enough that I wouldn't have to work 3 jobs anymore. But, Hannah smiled despite herself. Her mother always knew there was a but. But something feels complicated about this family. People are afraid of them. Mrs. Romano, Marco, even customers at the restaurant, they all get nervous when the Davis family comes in. And I don't know what Victor Davis does for a living, but I don't think it's entirely legal. Rose was quiet for a long moment, her breathing the only sound in the small room. And the boy? Matthew? Hannah's expression softened immediately. He's special, Mom. He's been through so much and he's so young. When I'm with him, he's different, calmer, more open. His teacher said he's been participating in class for the first time. I think I'm actually helping him. Of course you are. You've always had a gift with children. It's why you wanted to be a teacher. Rose paused, catching her breath. But Hannah, being good at something and being responsible for it are different things. If you take this job, you're not just helping a child for an hour here and there. You're becoming part of his life, part of that family's life. I know. And what happens when you want to leave? What happens if this Victor Davis isn't the kind of man who takes no for an answer? Hannah had been asking herself the same questions for the past 2 days. I don't know, Mom. I honestly don't know. Rose reached out, taking Hannah's hand with her thin fingers. Sweetheart, I need you to hear this. And I need you to really listen. I don't want you taking this job for me. Mom, no, listen. I know the medical bills are crushing you. I know you're working yourself to exhaustion. But Hannah, I would rather spend whatever time I have left with my daughter who's free to make her own choices than have her trapped in something dangerous because of me. Tears welled in Hannah's eyes. You're not a burden, Mom. You're my mother. Taking care of you is what I want to do. I know, baby. But take care of yourself too. If you take this job, make sure it's because you want to help that little boy, not because you're desperate to save me. Desperation makes us accept things we shouldn't. Hannah wiped her eyes, considering her mother's words. Was she desperate? Absolutely. But was that the only reason she was considering Victor's offer? She thought about Matthew's small hand in hers, about the trust in his eyes when he'd asked if she would leave, about the promise she'd made. I want to help him, Hannah said quietly. Matthew deserves someone who shows up for him consistently, someone who sees him as more than a problem to be managed. Then maybe this is the right choice, Rose said. Just promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you'll remember who you are and what matters to you. Don't lose yourself trying to save everyone else. I promise, Mom. Rose squeezed her hand. And Hannah, if you ever feel unsafe or trapped, you leave. You hear me? No amount of money is worth your safety or your peace of mind. You leave, and we'll figure out the rest. Hannah called Victor Davis that evening and accepted his offer. They agreed she would start after the holidays, giving her time to properly leave her other jobs and make arrangements. But in the meantime, she would continue seeing Matthew at Romano's on their regular schedule. The following Tuesday, when the Davis party arrived, Matthew's face lit up in a way Hannah had never seen before. It wasn't quite a smile. That seemed beyond him still. But his eyes brightened, and he walked directly to her instead of hanging back behind his father. Miss Moore, he said quietly, his small voice carrying carefully chosen words. I have something to ask you. Hannah crouched down to his level. What is it, Matthew? He glanced back at his father, who gave a slight nod of encouragement. Matthew reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, an invitation printed on heavy cardstock with gold lettering. My school is having a winter showcase, Matthew explained, his words coming faster than usual. Students perform things. I'm playing piano. Father said I could invite someone. Would you come? Hannah's heart melted. She took the invitation carefully, reading the details. The showcase was Friday evening at St. Augustine's Preparatory Academy. She had a shift at Romano's that night, but she knew Mrs. Romano would understand. I would be honored to come, Hannah said warmly. Will you play a song you've been practicing? Matthew nodded. Beethoven. For Elise. It's hard, but my teacher says I'm good at piano. It's the only thing I'm good at. Matthew, that's not true. You're good at lots of things. He looked skeptical, as if kindness was something he couldn't quite trust yet, but he carefully took the invitation back and placed it in Hannah's hands again, making sure she had it securely. Thank you for saying yes, he whispered, then returned to the booth where his father waited. Victor caught Hannah's eye and gave her a nod that might have been approval. She tucked the invitation into her apron pocket, feeling the weight of yet another promise, yet another line being crossed between being a friendly waitress and becoming someone who mattered in this child's life. Friday evening arrived cold and clear. Hannah had borrowed a nicer dress from her roommate Sarah, a simple navy blue sheath that was more formal than anything she owned. She felt self-conscious as she approached St. Augustine's Preparatory Academy, an imposing brick building in the Upper East Side that practically radiated wealth and privilege. The lobby was filled with well-dressed parents, all looking like they belonged in a magazine spread about successful New Yorkers. Hannah smoothed her borrowed dress, suddenly aware of her second-hand coat and worn boots. Miss Moore? Victor Davis appeared beside her, seemingly from nowhere. He was dressed in a dark suit that probably cost more than Hannah's monthly rent. Thank you for coming. Matthew has asked for you 3 times already. I wouldn't miss it, Hannah said, meaning it. Victor studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Come, I'll show you to the auditorium. You'll sit with me. This surprised Hannah. She'd assumed she'd find a seat in the back, stay unobtrusive, but Victor was already walking toward the auditorium doors, clearly expecting her to follow. The auditorium was beautiful. Polished wood floors, velvet seats, a proper stage with professional lighting. Parents filled the rows, chatting in low voices. Hannah noticed how conversations seemed to quiet slightly as Victor passed, how people's eyes followed them. She saw the same careful distance she'd observed at Romano's, that subtle pulling away that spoke of fear or respect or both. Victor led her to seats in the third row, close enough to see everything, but not so close as to be presumptuous. As they settled in, Hannah noticed the whispers, the curious glances directed at her. Who was this young woman sitting with Victor Davis? What was her connection to the family? Ignore them, Victor said quietly, as if reading her mind. They gossip because they have nothing better to do with their privileged lives. The showcase began with younger children, kindergartners singing holiday songs, first graders reciting poems. Hannah watched with genuine enjoyment, appreciating the innocence and enthusiasm of children who hadn't yet learned to be self-conscious. Then came the elementary performances. A girl played violin, another performed a dance routine. Each child was met with enthusiastic applause from proud parents. Finally, the presenter announced, Matthew Davis will perform Für Elise by Ludwig van Beethoven. Hannah felt her breath catch as Matthew walked onto the stage. He looked tiny up there, his dark suit making him seem even smaller against the vast space. He walked to the piano with careful, measured steps, his face serious and focused. For a moment, Matthew stood beside the piano bench, his hands at his sides. Hannah could see him scanning the audience, and when his eyes found hers, something in his posture changed. His shoulders relaxed slightly. He gave her the tiniest nod, then sat down at the piano. The first notes of Für Elise filled the auditorium, and Hannah was transported. Matthew played beautifully. Not perfectly, there were a few hesitations, a couple of notes that didn't quite land, but with genuine feeling. His small hands moved across the keys with surprising confidence, and his face, usually so guarded, showed complete concentration and something that might have been peace. Hannah realized she was crying silently, moved by the vulnerability of this child who trusted so little but was willing to share this talent, this piece of himself, in front of all these people. She glanced at Victor and was shocked to see his jaw tight, his eyes suspiciously bright. When Matthew finished, the applause was polite but not overwhelming, nothing like what the other children had received. Hannah stood immediately, clapping with genuine enthusiasm, and Victor stood beside her. Gradually, more people stood, until most of the auditorium was giving Matthew a standing ovation. On stage, Matthew looked stunned. His eyes found Hannah's again, and this time, for the first time since she'd known him, he smiled. A real, genuine, beautiful smile that transformed his entire face. After the showcase, parents and children gathered in the school's reception hall for refreshments. Hannah stayed close to Victor, still feeling out of place but committed to seeing Matthew. Miss Moore! Hannah turned to find an elegant woman in her 50s approaching, wearing glasses and a warm smile. I'm Mrs. Patterson, Matthew's teacher. I wanted to thank you personally. Thank me? For what? For whatever you've been doing with Matthew. The change in him over the past month has been remarkable. He's participating in class discussions. He made a friend, Tommy Chin, another quiet boy, and he actually volunteered to perform tonight. Before we could barely get him to speak, Hannah felt her cheeks warm. I haven't done anything special. I just spend time with him. Sometimes that's exactly what children need. Someone who simply spends time with them without expectations or judgment. Mrs. Patterson's eyes were kind. Are you family? I don't think we've met before. Hannah hesitated, unsure how to explain. I'm a friend. I'll be spending more time with Matthew starting in January. Wonderful. He needs more people like you in his life, Mrs. Patterson glanced across the room where Matthew stood with his father, clutching a cup of juice and looking overwhelmed. He's a special child. Brilliant, actually. His IQ test scores are exceptional, but he's been through so much. His emotional development has been complicated. His mother, Hannah said quietly. Mrs. Patterson nodded. Among other things, it's not easy being Victor Davis's son. The other parents, she lowered her voice. They keep their children away from Matthew. The isolation only makes things harder for him. Hannah watched Matthew, saw how he stood slightly apart even while next to his father, how his eyes constantly scanned the room as if looking for danger or judgment. That's going to change, Hannah said with quiet determination. He deserves friends. He deserves to be a normal kid. I hope you're right, Miss Moore. I truly do. As Mrs. Patterson walked away, Matthew broke free from his father's side and came directly to Hannah. Without warning, he wrapped his small arms around her waist in a brief, fierce hug. You came, he whispered into her dress. You really came. Hannah gently hugged him back, her heart breaking and healing simultaneously. Of course I came. I promised. Didn't I? People break promises. Not me. Not to you. Matthew pulled back, looking up at her with those dark, serious eyes. Miss Moore, Father says you're going to work for us, that you'll be with me after school and on weekends. Is that true? Hannah crouched down to his level. Yes, that's true. Starting in January, I'll spend a lot more time with you. We can do homework together or read or go to the park, whatever you'd like. Will you teach me things? Like a real teacher? If you want me to. What would you like to learn? Matthew thought seriously about this. How to be normal. How to make friends. He struggled for words. How to be good. Hannah took his small hands in hers. Matthew, you already are good. You're smart and talented and brave. Playing that piano tonight took real courage. We'll work on the other things together, okay? Making friends, feeling comfortable around other kids. But you're already good, right now, exactly as you are. Promise? Promise. Victor approached them then, his presence commanding attention, even in the crowded room. Matthew, it's time to go. Say goodbye to Miss Moore. Goodbye, Miss Moore. See you Tuesday. See you Tuesday, Matthew. You were wonderful tonight. After they left, Hannah stood alone in the reception hall for a moment, feeling the weight of what she'd just committed to. She'd crossed another line tonight, from friendly acquaintance to someone Matthew was starting to depend on, someone he was beginning to trust with his deepest fears and hopes. The weekend passed in a blur of final shifts at her soon-to-be former jobs. Hannah gave notice at the coffee shop and the grocery store, both managers understanding but sad to see her go. Mrs. Romano was the hardest. You're sure about this? The older woman asked, holding both of Hannah's hands in the restaurant's kitchen. Once you're in with that family, it's not easy to leave. I'm sure, Hannah said, though her stomach churned with uncertainty. Matthew needs consistency, and I need to be able to take care of my mother. This solves both problems. Just promise me you'll be careful, that you'll remember who you are. That's the second time someone's told me that, Hannah said with a sad smile. My mother said the same thing. Because we both know you, dear. You have such a good heart, but sometimes good hearts get taken advantage of. On Monday morning, Hannah received a phone call from an unfamiliar number. A woman's crisp voice informed her that a car would pick her up at noon for a meeting with Mr. Davis. The car turned out to be a sleek black sedan with a driver who opened her door and said nothing during the entire ride into Manhattan. They pulled up in front of an elegant building in Tribeca, and Hannah was escorted to a penthouse office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Victor Davis stood at the windows, his back to her, phone pressed to his ear. He was speaking in low tones about the shipment and next quarter's projections. When he finished, he turned to face Hannah. Miss Moore, thank you for coming. Please sit. Hannah settled into a leather chair that probably cost more than her mother's medical bills. Victor took the seat across from her, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. Before you officially start, we need to discuss expectations and boundaries, he began. You'll be with Matthew from 3:30 when school ends until 8 in the evening on weekdays. Weekends will vary depending on my schedule, but generally Saturday afternoons and Sunday mornings. Hannah nodded, pulling out a notebook to take notes. You'll use the car service to pick him up from school. There's a guest house on my property in Westchester. You'll stay there when you're working. It's fully furnished. Wait, Hannah interrupted. Stay there? I thought this was just day work. Some evenings I have business that runs late. It's easier if you're available. You'll have your own space, complete privacy, and of course you'll still have 4 days off per week. Hannah tried to process this. Living part-time in Westchester, in a guest house on Victor Davis's property. It felt like another line being crossed, another step deeper into this family's world. My mother, Hannah said carefully. I need to be able to check on her, to make sure she's okay. Your mother's medical expenses will be covered directly. I've already arranged for the best pulmonary specialist in New York to consult on her case, and a full-time nursing service. Patricia will continue as her primary nurse, but she'll have backup. Hannah felt dizzy. Mr. Davis, that's too much. It's practical, Victor interrupted. You can't focus on my son's well-being if you're constantly worried about your mother. This removes that distraction. It was logical, but it also felt like a trap. Victor Davis was solving all her problems, removing all her obstacles, but in doing so he was also removing any excuse she might have to leave. There are rules, Victor continued. You don't discuss my business with anyone. What you see, what you hear in my home, it stays private. You don't bring friends or family to the property, and most importantly, you don't make promises to my son that you can't keep. I would never. I know. That's why I'm hiring you. But I need you to understand the stakes. Matthew has already been abandoned by one person who was supposed to love him unconditionally. If you commit to this, you commit fully. You don't get to change your mind in 3 months, because it's harder than you expected. Hannah met his gaze steadily. I understand. And I'm committed. Matthew deserves stability. He also deserves honesty. He's going to ask you questions about his mother, about my work, about why other children avoid him. You'll answer those questions truthfully but age-appropriately. Don't lie to him, but don't give him more information than a 6-year-old can handle. What should I tell him about his mother? Victor's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Tell him she made choices that took her away from him. Tell him those choices had nothing to do with him being lovable or worthy. Tell him, he paused, something flickering across his face. Tell him that sometimes adults fail their children, but that doesn't mean the child is a failure. In that moment, Hannah saw past the intimidating businessman to something more complicated. A father who genuinely loved his son but had no idea how to show it in healthy ways. A man who'd probably had his own difficult childhood. Someone who was doing his best with tools that were all wrong for the job. I can do that, Hannah said softly. Good. You start January 2nd. I'll have contracts drawn up for you to review. And Miss Moore? Thank you. My son smiled for the first time in 3 years on Friday night. That's worth more than any amount of money. Christmas came and went quietly. Hannah spent it with her mother, grateful for the new medication regimen that the fancy pulmonary specialist had prescribed. Rose was breathing easier, had more energy, even smiled more. The cloud of financial anxiety that had hung over them for years had lifted, replaced by something Hannah couldn't quite name. Relief mixed with unease. You're worried, Rose observed on Christmas evening as they watched old movies together. A little, Hannah admitted. I start tomorrow, it feels real now. Second thoughts? Not about helping Matthew, but about everything else. Living in that house part-time, being so dependent on one family's money, not knowing exactly what Victor Davis does that makes everyone so nervous. Rose was quiet for a moment. You know, when your father was sick, people kept telling me to be practical, to think about money, to plan for the worst. And I did. But I also made sure to hold his hand every day, to tell him I loved him, to be present for the time we had left. She turned to Hannah. Sometimes the practical thing and the right thing aren't the same, but sometimes they are. You're helping a child who needs you and you're taking care of me. That's both practical and right. What if it changes me? Hannah whispered. What if being around that world, whatever it is, makes me someone different? Then you'll feel it happening, and you'll make different choices. You're not trapped, Hannah. Not really. You can always leave if you need to. But as Hannah lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling, she wondered if that was true. Victor Davis had made it very clear that commitments mattered, that Matthew couldn't handle another person disappearing from his life. How could she leave if it meant breaking a little boy's heart? She thought about Matthew's face when he'd played piano, about his fierce hug in the reception hall, about his question, "Will you teach me how to be normal?" Whatever happened, whatever lines she crossed or compromises she made, she had to remember why she was doing this. Not for the money, not for security, but because a 6-year-old boy with dark, wounded eyes deserved someone who showed up, someone who stayed. Hannah closed her eyes and made herself a promise. She would help Matthew Davis become the person he was meant to be, teach him that he was worthy of love and friendship, show him that not everyone leaves, and somehow she would do it without losing herself in the process. Tomorrow she would step fully into Victor Davis's world. Tomorrow the real work would begin. Tomorrow, everything would change. 6 months had passed since Hannah Moore walked through the gates of the Davis estate for the first time. Now, on a warm June afternoon, she sat on a blanket in Central Park, watching Matthew play with Tommy Chen, the quiet boy from his class who'd become his first real friend. The transformation had been gradual but unmistakable. The child who once destroyed restaurant tables now laughed as he kicked a soccer ball, his face open and unguarded in a way Hannah had never imagined possible during those early days at Romano's. "Miss Moore, did you see that?" Matthew called, running over with flushed cheeks. "I almost scored." "I saw. You're getting really good," Hannah said, handing him a water bottle. "Having fun?" "So much fun." Matthew's smile was genuine, easy. "Can Tommy come over next weekend? We want to build that rocket we've been planning." "I'll ask your father tonight." Tommy's mother, Lisa Chen, approached with a warm smile. She'd been initially hesitant about the playdate arrangement, but Hannah's consistent presence and Matthew's obvious progress had won her over. Thank you for organizing this, Lisa said, settling onto the blanket. Tommy talks about Matthew constantly now. It's wonderful to see them together. Hannah watched the boys return to their game, her heart full. This, children being children, making friends, experiencing joy, this was what she'd been working toward. The journey hadn't been simple. Those first months had tested Hannah in ways she hadn't anticipated. Living part-time at the estate meant witnessing aspects of Victor's business that made her uncomfortable. Tense phone calls, serious men in expensive suits, conversations that ended abruptly when she entered rooms. She'd kept her promise to her mother and to herself. She paid attention to how it made her feel, maintained her boundaries, and focused on Matthew. When Victor asked her to cancel plans to accommodate his schedule, she respectfully declined unless it was truly necessary. When she overheard conversations that troubled her, she didn't pretend she hadn't heard, but she also didn't pry. The turning point had come 3 months into her employment. On a cold March evening when Matthew had witnessed a heated argument between his father and a business associate, the boy had regressed, refusing to eat, withdrawing into silence, the old defensive behaviors resurfacing. Hannah had found him in his room, curled up on his bed, and sat beside him in quiet companionship until he was ready to talk. "Father is bad, isn't he?" Matthew had whispered finally. "That's why people are scared." Hannah had chosen her words carefully, remembering Victor's instruction to be honest but age-appropriate. "Your father makes choices in his business that are complicated. Some of those choices aren't good choices. But Matthew, that doesn't mean you have to make the same choices when you grow up. You get to choose who you want to be. What if I'm bad like him? You're not bad. You're kind and smart and talented. You care about people. I've seen you comfort Tommy when he was sad. I've watched you feed the birds in the garden because you worried they were hungry. Those are the choices that show who you really are. But what if I can't be good? What if something's wrong with me?" Hannah had taken his hand. "Matthew, listen to me. You are not broken. You are not wrong. You've been hurt, and you've learned some unhealthy ways to deal with that hurt. But every day, you're learning better ways. Every day, you're choosing kindness over anger, connection over isolation. That's not easy, and you're doing it. That's what makes you strong." The conversation had led to Hannah making a bold decision. She'd approached Victor the next morning with a proposal. Matthew needed regular therapy with a child psychologist, needed to attend regular school where he could interact with peers daily, needed structure and normalcy that the current arrangement couldn't provide. Victor's initial reaction had been defensive. "My son doesn't need a therapist, he has you. I'm not trained to help him process trauma, Mr. Davis. I can provide consistency and care, but he needs professional support too. And he needs more than just Tommy. He needs to be part of a community. You want me to send him to public school? I want you to give him the chance to be a normal kid. St. Augustine's is too insular, too focused on academic achievement. He needs recess and art class and field trips." The argument had been intense but ultimately productive. Victor had agreed, not immediately, but over the following weeks, Hannah had watched him genuinely consider what was best for his son, rather than what protected his image or maintained control. By April, Matthew was enrolled in a progressive private school with smaller class sizes and an emphasis on emotional development. He'd started seeing Dr. Sarah Goldman, a child psychologist who specialized in trauma. The changes had been remarkable. Now, watching Matthew play soccer with such unself-conscious joy, Hannah felt the validation of every difficult conversation, every boundary maintained, every moment she'd chosen to show up even when it was hard. "Hannah?" She turned to find Victor Davis approaching across the grass, dressed more casually than she'd ever seen him, khaki pants and a button-down shirt instead of his usual suit. He'd been making an effort lately to attend Matthew's activities, to be present rather than just providing. "Mr. Davis, Matthew's having a wonderful time." Victor watched his son for a long moment, something soft in his expression. "He's different now, happy. He's learning to trust that good things can last, because of you." Victor sat on the blanket, his presence still commanding, but less intimidating than it once was. "I want to discuss something with you. Matthew's birthday is next month. He wants a party, a real party with school friends. He's never wanted that before." Hannah smiled. "That's wonderful. He mentioned it to me. He wants a space theme. I'd like you to help plan it. And Hannah," Victor paused, seeming to struggle with words, "I'd like you to consider staying on permanently, not just as Matthew's companion, but as part of his life. He sees you as family." Hannah felt the weight of the request. "Mr. Davis, Victor, After 6 months, you can call me Victor. Victor, she amended. I care deeply about Matthew, but I'm not his parent. Eventually, he'll need less intensive support. He'll grow up, become independent. My role should be temporary, or it could evolve. You could pursue your education degree. I'd pay for it. You could become his tutor, then eventually transition to pursuing your own teaching career while remaining in his life as family. The offer was generous, almost too generous. But Hannah had learned to look at the motivation behind Victor's offers. You want me to promise I'll never leave, she said gently. But Victor, the healthiest thing I can teach Matthew is that people's roles in our lives can change without that meaning abandonment. I can be important to him without being permanent. That's actually a healthy lesson. That love doesn't require forever to be real. Victor was quiet, processing this. Finally, you're right. I'm trying to control something I can't control. My son's therapist has been telling me the same thing. You're going to therapy too? Dr. Goldman suggested family sessions. To work on, he gestured vaguely, being a better father, dealing with my own issues so they don't damage him further. Hannah felt unexpected pride. That's really brave, Victor. It's terrifying, he admitted, acknowledging all the ways I've failed him. But watching him now, seeing him laugh, I want to be someone who deserves that laughter. They sat in comfortable silence, watching Matthew and Tommy play. The June sun filtered through the trees, and somewhere nearby a street musician was playing saxophone. It was a perfect New York moment, the kind that made you remember why people loved this complicated, exhausting city. Miss Moore, Matthew ran over, breathless and happy. Father, you're here. I came to watch you play, Victor said, and Matthew's face lit up even more. Will you play with us just for a little while? Victor glanced at Hannah, uncertain. She gave him an encouraging nod. All right, but I'm warning you. I haven't kicked a soccer ball in 20 years. Watching Victor Davis, businessman, feared by many, complicated and flawed, awkwardly kick a soccer ball with his son while Tommy laughed at his rusty skills, Hannah felt something settle in her chest. This was what success looked like. Not perfection, not complete transformation, but progress. A father trying, a son healing, a family learning to be functional despite their fractures. 6 months ago, she'd been an exhausted waitress offering cake to a troubled child. Now she was part of something larger. Not a savior, not a hero, just someone who'd shown up consistently and refused to give up on a little boy who'd been taught that everyone leaves. As the afternoon sun stretched their shadows across the grass, Matthew ran back to Hannah one more time. Miss Moore, thank you for today. Thank you for everything. You're welcome, Matthew. But you know what? You did the hard work. You chose to trust, to try, to let people in. That took real courage. Will you always be my friend? Even when I'm grown up? Hannah thought about her conversation with Victor, about healthy expectations and the truth about relationships. I'll always care about you, Matthew. Always. Even if our relationship changes as you get older, even if you don't need me around as much someday, that won't change how proud I am of you or how much I've valued being part of your life. Matthew considered this seriously, then nodded. That's fair. Tommy says his babysitter from when he was little isn't around anymore, but he still thinks about her sometimes and feels happy. Maybe it could be like that. Exactly like that. As they packed up to leave, Hannah pulled out her phone and texted her mother. Beautiful day in the park. Matthew is thriving. I think we made the right choice. Her mother's response came quickly. Proud of you, sweetheart. Come home tonight. I made your favorite soup. Hannah smiled. Home. She had multiple homes now. Her apartment with her mother, the guest house at the estate, and maybe most importantly, the home she'd helped create for a little boy who desperately needed someone to show him that the world could be safe, that people could be trusted, that he was worthy of love exactly as he was. It wasn't a perfect ending. Victor still ran businesses she didn't fully understand. Matthew still had difficult days where old patterns emerged. Hannah still worried about money sometimes, still worked hard to maintain boundaries between being helpful and being controlled. But it was real. It was progress. And on beautiful June afternoons like this one, watching a once isolated child play soccer with his friend while his father looked on with genuine pride, it was enough, more than enough. It was exactly what Hannah had hoped for when she'd offered that first slice of cake to a small boy who needed someone to see past his defenses to the hurting child underneath. She'd shown up, she'd stayed, and together, They'd all learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is trust that tomorrow might be better than today.